We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady. We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
You just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam. So who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, all the things that go with it.
Welcome in to the PFF NFL Podcast. Sam Monson, not flying solo because we got the boss. We got Cris Collinsworth standing in for Steve. You didn't bring your fro, though, to this podcast.
Oh, my God. How that was unbelievable. Did his little picture change? Is it full froed out
He
now?
gave it a little bit of a beefy fro on the back there.
Oh, my God. Like, I'd always heard about it,
right?
You know, but I never imagined.
It's more glorious in person.
Yeah. You know who else was like that? Was Anthony Munoz, my teammate.
Oh, really?
He showed me a picture. He was a pitcher, believe it or not, at USC in college. And I mean, this guy's 6'6" and weighs 300 and whatever pounds, and had an afro out to there. I'd be hitting from the on deck circle. I wouldn't even get any. And he goes, I said, "Were you wild?" He goes, "Oh my God, I had no idea where it was going."
What's truly amazing about Steve is that so he's like somewhere between 6'8" and 6'10", depending on if you take the listed height or his actual height. And you kind of accept that, right? You get used to it just because he's around the whole time. But when he has the fro out, he's like 7'4". So suddenly you're like, wow, that guy is huge.
I listened to the show when he came on. And it was like you just would start laughing at random times.
And that was 20 minutes after like he first walked in. It took me a clear 20 minutes to get myself together because he comes in and there's like 5 minutes of tears laughing. But then he sort of sits down and we're preparing for the podcast and stuff. But every time I would look up, I just immediately burst out laughing. Like I couldn't, just the sight of it was just, it just had me completely lose myself.
But this is like the big show, man. I'm like a little nervous here. I'm coming on and you guys have built an incredible audience and the millions and millions of people.
Millions and millions,
Steve
exactly. And we're gonna send some to you, to the Cris Collinsworth podcast
there
featuring
you go.
Richard
I could
Sherman.
use a few.
You over there with your fancy names and your celebrity and your NFL players. We'll get you to millions and millions of listeners as well.
All good.
You're taking off later today. I'm curious, are you running away from the cicada apocalypse that's bearing down upon us?
You haven't been here during that, have you?
No.
I mean,
First
it's biblical almost. I mean,
this is insane. Like every 17 years, apparently, this plague of cicadas comes out of the ground and does I don't know what for a couple of days, but apparently it's bad.
Apparently we do know what they do, and then they go back in the ground for 17 days. But yeah, I had one. I was on the golf course the other day and had one fly on my shoe, and I was like, oh hell, what is this? When they get to like the ground?
Yeah, the ground is like 64 degrees or something
like that. Yeah, and they start cutting. But I mean, the noise is unbelievable,
yeah,
and they will
get
be
100 decibels or something
everywhere. I mean, they're just like everywhere. Yeah, well, like I didn't grow up with any of this stuff.
Yeah.
You don't have any idea what's going on.
I don't think we even have cicadas in Ireland. So the whole thing is like I've seen a few of them out in the morning walk with the dog now. So we got a dog over Christmas, and my wife is reading all this stuff. She's like, you got to stop the dog eating them all because they're going to be jumping all over. it sounds ridiculous. But so I've seen like a couple of them now on walks, but I'm waiting for the swarm to come in.
I'm just telling you will not believe it when it happens. You will not believe it. So, the thing that's so interesting for me about your guys' show is, you cover soup to nuts. It's a great – we actually have had a couple of investors who kind of fell in love with your guys' show.
Okay.
Learning how to bet and learning all about the game and all that kind of stuff. But that was the introduction. They found your podcast and then ended up bringing money to the table. So
the number of people that have like told us, we're talking to NFL people that have like told us that they listen to the show, and I don't know what your initial reaction to that is supposed to be, but for me, it's always like, oh no, like people, what have we been saying?
I didn't mean that. That's like when the dudes so when I go to, we interview the one team or the other, the home team. So we go out and we watch their practice, and inevitably, a couple of guys will come walking over. But when a 320-pound guy is walking towards me, all I'm thinking is, God, what was his grade?
Right.
Like, is he coming mad or is he coming happy? Is he coming, because it's always, and I've had guys during the course of interviews that, like, I say something about him, like, he plays out of control, or he's, it wasn't quite that bad. I can't remember exactly what it was. And then their mothers or their sister will tell them about it. And then it's like becomes this life of their own. And they literally come over like ready to fight. And I'm like, dude, I don't even know what you're talking about. I go, what is it again? So but people can take one thing.
Yeah.
That you said. I'm sure running backs love you guys, I'm sure those guys are all ready to attack you at any given time.
Yeah, I'm sure. That was one of the questions I meant to ask you. Is like, how many times have we PFF rather than me and Steve? I'm sure.
But you and Steve a lot. But go ahead.
Look,
George and Eric are getting into it a little bit.
I'm sure that's
George made my life in Pittsburgh really uncomfortable with Big Ben up there.
That's what I was going to ask. How much have we gotten you into trouble on these, production meetings, or when you talk to guys every week before those games?
Well, I'll just say this. I started listening a lot more. So I had some defense for what you guys – like, I can get in enough trouble with what I say.
Right.
But now it's like I'm multiplying it by my 600 kids that work for me now. And, it gets
This
interesting.
is the thing I think that I think I have developed a greater appreciation for anybody who is, like, paid to talk for a living and does it for, like, a decent amount of time. Like, just the ability these people have to not say stupid things is incredible. Like Colin Cowherd, right? That dude is doing 4 hours of TV a day, every day. Like, if he comes out of a week with only saying one dumb thing, that's a miracle.
Well, the other part of it is, like, when I was doing the Thursday night and the Sunday night.
Right.
So I'm literally on live national television to the two biggest audiences usually of the week. And that's whatever, 6 hours or so. I'm speaking live to America more than the president of the United States.
Way more.
Yeah. I mean, there's no question, right? It's not even close. And I've got a bigger audience too. and you know how long I can go without saying something stupid. I mean, we're all in that cat. Plus you get caught up in the emotion of the game. And I always say that when I forget that I'm announcing the game and I just start watching the game is when I actually start enjoying the broadcast. As soon as the opening on camera is over with, which is the worst thing, because all you can do is screw it up. You come out and it's like everybody knows you've like rehearsed something and you've written it down and you've thought about it, and you come out and you go, and
it's also like the most every time you rehearse something like that, you feel like there's a way to do it and you need to nail it. And if you deviate from the rehearsal and you screw it up, the whole thing goes to hell, and you just feel like an idiot.
It's the best thing that happened was the stupid slide-in.
I didn't make you do that, did you?
Yeah, well, I should have. I mean, I do it for every radio show or whatever.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10.
Chris, you got to do it. You got to do it. Okay. So like a Zoom call. Hey,
like on a scale of 1 to 10, how tired is that getting?
Yeah. It's lame. But the whole thing, it was so funny because it totally surprised us. We didn't know it was becoming like a thing. I was like a meme and all this different stuff. But back when Al and I could sit next to each other, they would put a mark on the desk and a mark for me. And so they said, like, all right, just straddle your legs around that mark. Oh, okay. So we're sitting there, and our director, Drew Eskoff, comes on. He goes, Chris, get your ass out of the shot. I go, what do you mean? I go, they gave me my mark. I got my legs straddled around the things. This is Al's like solo moment. This is in his contract. He has to, have this. So I was like, what do you want me to do? He said, just lean out of the shot. And I go, like this? And so I do like this, right? And so Al does his thing. And then he says, let's bring in our partner, Cris Collinsworth, da-da-da. And then, I got to get back in the shot. So I do this, right? And so apparently the guy from Bleacher Report put together this thing that was like a World Cup soccer match.
Yeah.
It was on a Jumbotron and like 5,000 people in this bar watching this thing. And all of a sudden they're all watching and they go crazy. Well, the video is of me sliding in. And so I do this and it goes crazy. So me, how unsophisticated I am. I was like, God, they really like this stuff. And then they're like, hey, you idiot, man. They put that over the thing. I go, oh, I get it. But then it was like we couldn't get away from it. It was like
ridiculous.
Like a real thing.
That's like that. I think is my most endearing story I've heard you tell. That you thought that little meme clip was
oh
like
yeah,
a real
I thought it was
thing.
real.
Yeah.
But not for long.
No, I know.
Well,
right.
But I was
you
like,
didn't go on like a week thinking, dude, these people love that.
Come on.
It's weird, like when the stuff you have to do just to, like you say, lean out of a shot. When we were doing all this stuff, recording from home now with COVID and all this kind of stuff, I have this office chair, but it's got like a ridiculous big headrest behind me, right? And when you're looking at the camera, the headrest kind of comes out. It looks like Steve, right? It's got like wings at the back of my hair. My dad calls me up one day. He's like, you can't sit in front of that chair. It looks ridiculous. Like I was trying to work out what the hell was on your head. And then even when I figured out it was the office chair, it still looked absurd. You can't be in that chair. Well, I don't have a different chair. So I was like doing something yesterday where I had to turn it sideways like this, and then it's still in the shot. So I now have to like lean over here and all of this just to do exactly what you're saying, just to be out of the shot.
I finally figured out for that opening on camera, nobody cares what I say.
Oh, of course.
Like for the Super Bowl, you get on there, and I don't care who you are when you start thinking, 120 million people watching me do this. And then I started going to Super Bowl parties, and I go, they can see me, but they ain't listening to me. And I could come out here and sing Yankee Doodle, and nobody would know the difference.
And even if they were, like the game, Super Bowl particularly, the game's been built up for 2 weeks. Everyone knows what's happening. Like, what are you going to say in 20 seconds to sum up what's about to happen that's, that nobody has thought of leading into that game?
Well, and the other part of it is, in today's media world, if you say something that's going to get you in trouble, doesn't matter if you said it in front of 120 million people or on a local radio show.
In fact, if anything, it's the local thing that's going to take off.
It kills you all because you always get more relaxed. And so NBC always wants me to go on radio shows and promote Sunday Night Football. I'm like, you want me to go on a radio where 20,000 people might be listening to promote the show, and if they're listening to me on the radio, I'm pretty sure they're already going to be watching the TV game. It doesn't make any sense to me, but there is real danger because you relax in front of like this. We can
Our
clearly.
show is the most dangerous thing you do now.
No question.
So you saw yesterday the Anthony Treash's thing about saying Tyreek Hill might be the best deep threat of all time, and like the internet jumped on him, right? It's Randy Moss, if you've never heard of this guy, and other people as well, depending on how far back you want to go. And Mike Parker dropped into the Slack channel that Cris Collinsworth has this pretty gaudy looking yards per reception figure. My question is, how many people that know who you are now do you think even know that you were this pretty good NFL player back in the day?
I think most people think I was a quarterback.
Right.
Like a lot of, they just assume I play quarterback because everybody who's on TV is a quarterback, I always thought that was one of the advantages that I had because You were a safety, right? Didn't you play safety?
At the end, when I slowed down, I was a safety.
Yeah, well, that's something me too. But, I mean, at some point in my life, like my first two positions when I first started, I was 119 pounds at 120-pound league. So I was offensive tackle and edge rusher.
Wow.
Right? So, and then I got moved to guard. I never played center. But I played tight end. My first snap, or one of my first snaps in the NFL, was a preseason game against Hugh Green, who was drafted like 4th overall from Pittsburgh. And they put me at tight end. The Bengals lined me up at tight end. And Hugh, I knew him from the draft process. We're both rookies. He goes, "What the hell are you doing here?" And he like picks me up and like smashes me down in the ground. Like, come on, dude, you had to do that? I go, it's, you know. So, but I've played quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, cornerback, safety. I was the kicker, the punter. I was the holder. I've been on chasing kicks.
Yeah.
I did that in the NFL one time. And I literally have played almost every position there is on the field at some point or another. So we get a lot of information about quarterbacks. And when I try to do in our broadcast on Sunday night is I really try to, I call it take a lap around the field. Like I want them to feel like they've seen the game from every position at some point in the game. The hardest thing to do is that we have a camera shot from behind the defense, but it's the camera shot from the sky cam is just so good.
Yeah.
It's always hard to take a replay of something from the defensive side, but I wish we could do that more because I think people would really enjoy seeing the stunts and the loops and the blitzes and some of the things that set up the great defensive plays.
Yeah, some of the angles that exist now, particularly on your guys' broadcast with the number of just shots you have are incredible.
I mean, I don't even know when I go every once in a while. The Bengals will play on a Thursday night or something, so I get to go to the game, or Monday night, and I go up there and I'm like, I'm just like drinking a beer, and you know, I can't even like get into the game because I have so many different ways to watch so many different. It's like flying an airplane, you know, and you know, like I can do so many things in the booth to see so many different things, and when I'm out there, it just feels like it's slow motion or something.
Yeah, you're like that Limitless movie, you know, the guy takes the drug and he can suddenly see everything, and you know, the brain's working like 200 miles an hour, and then when he goes off it, he's cold turkey, he's back to just regular human brain. That's what you're like when you get out of the booth. Now you're just sitting there with your own two eyes and one camera angle. Like, what is this?
Well,
crap?
I saw Elon Musk say one time on a podcast that pretty soon they're going to have a chip that they can. Have you heard this?
I've heard him talk about stuff like
that
this.
They can put, it's like a chip like that they're going to put in your brain, and it effectively will, anything your cell phone can do, you now will have, your brain will have access to. So if you want names, numbers, facts, data that you're going to, I'm like, for sure, the minute this comes out, if you need an experimental dog, I want to try this. Because that's my whole life, is trying to memorize all these names and numbers. And I'm like, oh, God. And then, you know, it's like a final exam in school. Then when you leave that game, you got to kind of do a brain dump and get it out of your brain so that 18 isn't 18 in the next team. Like almost every game you watch on television, number 18 does something and they call 18 on the other team. Like, you know, you hear that stuff all the time.
The worst thing that happened to me in school was the point in your school life where they handed you a calculator, right? Because before then you've been doing mental arithmetic. You got to work all this stuff out in your own head. And then somebody hands you a calculator. You're like, never need to know that anymore. Gone. Now, so we got, you know, Eric and George, these guys with PhDs in math. Like my math stopped in intermediate GCSE level in school, which is like, you know, somewhere in the middle of like the middle level at the bottom, like nothing. And all my mental arithmetic disappeared because I got given a calculator that I could take around with me the whole time. Phone makes it even worse because the thing's with you 24/7. Like the phone has just destroyed people's ability to think for themselves.
I think
so. I'm all in for the second they can put that in their head again.
Just put the chip in. I told Al one time because I really felt like that playing football was as much a mental exercise as it was a physical exercise, especially because we had a lot of reads in our offense. So I had to read the defense, make the break, get on the same page with Kenny, all that kind of stuff. And I told Al one time on the air, I go, because I really was. Math was like, I did really well in math. But I told him when I was getting ready for a game, I used to do the multiplication tables. Like I would just pick out random 6 times, all this different stuff, and I would do it. And so then this idiot, instead of me just letting me like make a statement, he goes, "Oh yeah, what's 9 times 7? What's 7 times?" And he starts firing math problems at me. I was like, "Would you stop and go back to the game?" Crazy.
What was I going to ask you off the back of that? That story has completely taken the point I was going to make out of my head. Wow, that's the closest that I've come to just locking up before. All right, so when Julio Jones is now potentially on the trade market, like everyone has thought this is going to be happening for a while, Atlanta is reported to actually be interested in doing it. The Falcons, by the way, this offseason, is it me or is there sort of putting this out into the world been relatively clumsy in terms of Atlanta would be interested in dealing the number 4 overall pick? And anyway, so they were apparently looking to move him. Somebody asked me this yesterday, and I didn't have that many teams that made sense for it anymore. I think a lot of them made sense before the draft, but like once the draft happens, you draft your first round wide receiver or whatever, and the number of spots that are available for Julio Jones kind of shrink. Where do you see him landing?
Well, it's been the speculation a little bit here lately too, but New England spent more on free agency this offseason than any team in the history of the league. And Robert Kraft summed it up best when he said, we used to laugh at teams who spent a lot of money on free agency. I want to say it's like $175 million in guarantees, some crazy number, right? And obviously they're reacting to Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl. I mean, there's just no other way to think about it. And if Julio Jones, we've seen great players at the end of their career, Randy Moss in particular, what he was able to do when he came over. If he looks at New England as being a Super Bowl team, which is an interesting discussion in and of itself. It used to be, hey, I'm at the end of my career, I made a bunch of money, now I want a ring. Do people still think that way about New England? Or now are they thinking about, well, I'd really then want to go to Tampa or Kansas City or San Francisco or somewhere. San Francisco would be a scary spot for him.
Yeah.
If you had all that sort of offense built around the run game, the bootleg, the play action, and oh, by the way, somebody's got to cover Julio one-on-one with, Kittle and Deebo Samuel and all those guys. That would be an interesting spot. But it all comes down to money. I could see New England. I don't know why. I just kind of, if I had to say who, I would say New England.
And it's interesting. They're obviously pivoting towards this like 2 tight end heavier style of offense. You make 2 different tight ends, the joint 3rd best paid tight end in the NFL, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry. So, and nobody ran less 2 tight end sets than the Patriots last year. Obviously, this offense is shifting in that direction. And you sort of think intuitively that doesn't leave a spot for an elite wide receiver or a number 1 wide receiver, but there's always a spot for the number 1 guy. It's 2 and 3 that miss out when you start, pivoting towards 2 tight end sets. It's like suddenly maybe Nelson Aguilar has less of a role if you bring in a Julio Jones, but there's always space for like an elite number 1 guy that can run down the field and toast your number 1 corner. So the Patriots, although they're moving in a different direction on offense, like they still have that role still exists.
Yeah, and with Cam in particular, because now you've got the added element of the runner and the whole thing, it does force some man coverage, and Julio has just been so dynamic. The thing that's so weird about his career is he just never became a touchdown machine.
It's
like you
bizarre.
would think
that's
that
one
body
of the great questions.
Mysteries. I mean, it's a total mystery as to how that could possibly happen. But yeah, I'm anxious to see what they're going to do. Like, I really thought that Justin Fields might be the play for New England in a trade up. because then you have Cam Newton, you have Justin Fields, you have kind of the same body type. You
Right.
build one offense and you make it great, and then you transition to the next guy and the whole thing. But with Mac Jones, now you sort of have Cam Newton and Tom Brady-ish, style of offense. So now, at what point are you thinking about making that transition? Because the offense is going to have to change.
What's your take on the whole Mac Jones thing in terms of, so the way that a lot of people were presenting this is that Justin Fields and Trey Lance, they bring all this athleticism and this extra dimension to the game that a guy like Mac Jones just doesn't have, right? Not a threat with his legs, not a threat on the move. He's a pocket passer, an old school throwback kind of pocket passer. And people were sort of saying because of that, he has a lower ceiling than those guys because he just doesn't have that extra dimension. But Tom Brady is also a pocket passer. Drew Brees is a pocket passer.
Troy Aikman.
Matt Ryan.
Just go back through the history of the Super Bowl. There have been way more pocket passes.
Even if you limit it to today, right? There's some elite high-level NFL players. You go back to the 90s and someone's going to say, well, the game's different. It's evolving. It's moving in this direction. But even right now, the Super Bowl champion quarterback who's 43 years old and playing as well as anybody is a relatively immobile pocket passer. There's still a whole bunch of those guys. So I'm not sure it changes his ceiling, but I think what it does is it means his floor is lower, because if you goof a little bit on how good you think he is as a pocket passer, there's nothing left to prop it up. If you goof a little bit on Trey Lance or Justin Fields, they can still do an insane amount on the Josh Allen, right? Josh Allen took 2 years to get to where he is right now, but they were able to keep rolling because Josh Allen was a freak on the ground and could make all these plays and prop up what he was deficient at as a passer.
Yeah, Mac Jones and Kyle Trask are the two examples in this draft, but even with those two guys, if you watch enough tape on them, Mac Jones made plays with his legs because he doesn't run 4.5. He's not going to
4.68. That's not slow.
No, usually those runs are because you're playing two-man and everybody's scattered about in coverage somewhere, and so there's wide open lanes. So whether you run 4.8 and pick up a first down or you run 4.4 and pick up a first down, not often are you going to go the distance from the quarterback position, right? But the simple logic of it for people to think about is what's better? Most offensive coordinators love a guy who will sit in the pocket and can move a little bit, but they can design an offense around that. When you go to the Deshaun Watsons of the world, you're kind of just turning over the keys to them.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what Russell Wilson's going to do. You don't know what Steve Young was going to do. We're going to be inside a structure, but the big plays that we're going to remember are going to come when they start to move around and they start to make plays with their legs. So, I just think that if you can think of it in terms of, if I'm in the middle of the field, remember in the NFL, they've got tight hash marks, so you don't have these wide hash marks that you've got to make plays with. If you sit in the middle of the field and you can throw it 60 yards that way, 60 yards that way, 53 yards of width across the field, some singular person sitting in the middle of the field that can attack that entire field is the most dynamic way to play football. The minute a quarterback rolls to one side or the other, you basically are now playing on 2/3 of a field. Yeah, maybe you can throw it all the way back. Yeah, a couple of them can do that. But for the most part, you've shrunk the size of the field. The biggest football field that you can play with is one quarterback sitting in the pocket in the middle of the field. So there is an argument to be made that is the best way to play. Certainly, I don't want to take away a Russell Wilson's skill set, but
even Wilson is a great example of that, because a lot of what he does is it's not running to sort of one side and getting himself boxed in. It's just running around in the backfield and eventually finding the thing that wasn't open initially. His thing is almost drop beyond the pocket and then just keep dancing until he finds something open, but he's still playing with the full field. He's not usually, rolling all the way to one side instead of cutting himself off and limiting the amount of field he's attacking to just this slice.
We did the playoff game with Seattle in Minnesota, and Minnesota's game plan coming into it was that they were gonna go all the way around the tackles. Like when you get pushed by, most teams don't want to do that. Minnesota intentionally did it because they knew Russell Wilson eventually would flip out backwards.
Right.
And they got at least one sack that day. And I was like, oh my God, the plan worked. It was like, that was just genius that worked. But I'm always a little surprised if I had been the general manager of Seattle and Russell made his comments about didn't like the offensive line, whatever it was. I would have said, Russ, one of the reasons we're paying you $40 million or whatever it is because I don't have to have as good an offensive line. Like you can make these guys miss. Like part of your salary is because I don't have to have those high-end players playing on the offensive line. Now, if you want me to get all the high-end guys, then I got to go draft a quarterback that's on a rookie wage, and I can do it that way too. But I'm doing this the opposite way. Because of your mobility, I can save some money here, build a defense, give you these top flight receivers. I'm just surprised that counter argument didn't come back out of Seattle.
I mean, maybe it did, and they just ultimately
to him personally.
Well, we're in this interesting world now where whether it's Russell Wilson, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, there does seem to be this trend of these big high-priced quarterbacks pushing the boundaries and seeing how much leverage they have. Right? A few years ago, I thought we were in this. When we were still at the tail end of this real lack of quarterback talent in the NFL. I remember there was a period where Alex Smith was getting a $100 million contract because the prospect of not having Alex Smith was terrifying, right? And you had to, even though it's Alex Smith, there's a limit to how good that guy is. If we don't have him, we could get just a complete disaster, and we can't have that. So we got to pay him. At that point, I thought quarterbacks were going to start really pushing this in terms of their contracts in particular. I thought when Andrew Luck's deal was coming up, he could have pushed for like a fully guaranteed deal, right? Give me 5 years, $150 million, 100% guaranteed, because otherwise, all right, I'm out of here. What are you going to do if I'm not here? You're screwed. And it didn't quite happen, I think, in large part because there was this big influx of talented quarterbacks that came in pretty quickly after that. But now they seem to be sort of pushing back in not a leverage with the contract way, but in you got to make me happy, otherwise I'm not just settling for this.
So if you were a general manager, and this is just a philosophical question, would you be, unless you had Mahomes, Brady, Rodgers, unless you had one of those top five, let's say there's five in that top category, wouldn't you rather have a rookie for 5 years and build to me, there's the people that have been knocked out of the box, if you will, are those middle tier quarterbacks. Yeah. Because you either have to, what we're seeing anyway, I think, is you're going to have a superstar quarterback, Tom Brady, or you're going to have a rookie quarterback, wage scale quarterback, and build the rest of the team. And it feels like that middle 10, 15 quarterbacks are like purgatory. I don't want to be here.
Yeah, it's like the Kirk Cousins debate, right? What do you do with Kirk Cousins? He's a very good quarterback, but he's not in that top five. He's not individually going to elevate everything around him to the point where it doesn't really matter what you put around him the way Mahomes can, right? Mahomes dragged that team to an AFC championship game with the worst defense in the NFL, and then they made the defense just a little bit better, and suddenly they're a Super Bowl team, easy. They're the best team in the NFL. Cousins can't do that. Cousins needs help around him, and he can still be a really good player, but it's your margin for error is so small with a guy like that because you have to pay him, the Kirk Cousins contract.
What would you do with Aaron Rodgers right now? I mean, to me, this is one of the more interesting ones. I mean, remember, Tom Brady basically got out for free. Yeah. So Tampa didn't have to give up anything to get him. Now we've got this conversation. Aaron Rodgers is 37, 38, I think. 38. God only knows how long these guys can play anymore. Right. But, you know, a few more years, he wants to do Jeopardy. He wants to do other things. He's a brilliant guy. He can do anything.
Still only 37.
Yeah. So would you be willing to take, if somebody really gave up the mother load, you know, I'm going to get all 3 first-round picks, I'm going to get a couple of players, you know, as a franchise now, I'm going to lose out on probably a really good 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
Right? But this also has a little bit of a feel of the Dallas Cowboys Herschel Walker trade that I may set up my franchise for the next 20 years because of the haul that I'm going to get out of this. Now, the only thing that bothered me in the whole thing when we started talking about it is what are those 3 first-rounders worth if you have Aaron Rodgers playing for the next 3 years? You almost want to go, okay, I want your post-Aaron Rodgers. I want in 2025, 6, and 7 your first-round picks.
It's so interesting because I think of his age, right? If Rodgers was like 34,
I agree.
He would get.
I agree.
He would get like it would be the Russell Wilson deal that we were talking about earlier, right? Which is there isn't a deal big enough that you can throw at them for them to take it. But because he's now 37, he'll be almost 38 when the season rolls around. It's like you have to at least wonder when that wall comes because Brady is not like the barometer. I mean, what Brady's doing is ridiculous. Breeze hit that wall at sort of 41. Manning hit it at 39, 40. That still exists. Like just because Brady is going to play till he's like 50 and show no signs of slowing down. I know Rodgers apparently bought the TB12 book.
I'm thinking about buying it. He gave me one time. I was like, I got to start reading this thing.
But you have if you're a team thinking about trading for him, that has to be part of the equation, right? Is that like how long do we think this guy can play at this level for? Because he's almost 38 years old. To me, if you're Green Bay, I mean, the question starts like, can we piece this thing back together? Because it's Aaron Rodgers. He's just come off an MVP season. We don't want to get rid of him. I mean, that's why the whole thing started essentially because they changed their mind. They were like, actually, the succession plan that we started last year, we want to park that for a minute because you just had an MVP season that we didn't think you were really capable of anymore. And Rodgers appears to have gone, well, no, you've already burned that bridge. I'm out of here. Like, if they think they can piece that back together again somehow, that should be job one. But then it becomes like, what does this trade look like? Because if the team trying to trade for him is, only in quotation marks offering like 2 first-round picks that will, as you say, be low first-round picks, particularly if it's like Denver. I mean, Denver's got like a Super Bowl favorite with Aaron Rodgers. So let's say the number 31 or 32 overall pick for the next 2 years. If I'm the Packers, I honestly would prefer to make him go host Jeopardy. I don't want him winning a Super Bowl when I'm stuck there with Jordan Love, and all I got out of it was like the number 31 pick 2 years in a row.
Is there a young quarterback? In other words, now we come right back to Deshaun Watson, right? I mean, and now you're I just have to set aside the baggage. Right. I understand. I know how insensitive a person I am that I even bring this up. I'm just going to talk about him as a football player. That if, in fact, a Deshaun Watson type were available in that kind of a swap for a period of time, and you've got the Houston Texans who are going to be hurting for a little while, maybe even with Aaron Rodgers because they were hurting with Deshaun Watson. It does something like that. Now you do have an answer. I've been just trying to piece together in my mind what would I entertain if I were the Green Bay Packers, and I'm just not sure anybody could put together enough of a package to make it make sense, short of a couple of young superstar players and all those first-round picks.
Yeah, and the thing is, you have to think that they love Jordan Love because it doesn't. What they did last year makes no sense unless they absolutely love that guy. Because with Rodgers' contract, like this was always going to be a problem because you could never move on this year, essentially, the way his contract is. So you started the replacement process at least a year too early. I agree with them in terms of, look, Rodgers has been heading down for a while. He hasn't played at this MVP level. We don't know if he's capable of doing that anymore. Looking to the future for a 37-year-old quarterback makes sense. Looking for the year they did, and when you consider they traded up to get Jordan Love, like that doesn't make any sense unless you think that that guy is amazing, at which point, I mean, nothing happened in the last 12 months to change that from their perspective. They're probably not looking for another quarterback in whatever deal they're getting for Rodgers. They're going to be looking for defensive superstars or an elite wide receiver or, something else other than the quarterback to come back in that deal. But look, I'm with you. I don't see many teams capable or willing to put that kind of package on the table.
I think the other thing that it deserves a conversation is if they had hit on a Justin Jefferson kind of player at that pick where they traded up to get Jordan Love, would they have won the last 2 Super Bowls?
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible.
Absolutely.
They were very close to 2 of them.
Yep.
And so, that's one that's going to be debated for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Rodgers thing is fascinating, but to me, the scariest prospect is like, what happens if we ship him off because we pissed him off, and then Denver wins the next 2 Super Bowls, and now you're sitting there having chased a second ring with Aaron Rodgers for like a decade, and you got nothing out of it but a couple of low-round picks. If I'm the Packers, I know Steve thinks the opposite, but I would rather he host Jeopardy and me get nothing out of it than me get a couple
live with the pain of him winning somewhere else.
Because look what's happening with Brady and Belichick right now. Like, okay, he walked out for nothing. I mean, you didn't really have the capacity to stop it, but you're telling me that doesn't irk Belichick watching Tom Brady win another Super Bowl, all the sort of pressure coming on Belichick to prove that he wasn't just a product of Brady, and also the Brady now bringing that New England draw, the ring chasing aspect to Tampa Bay. And look what they just did in terms of bringing everybody back.
We will never know the underlying.
Right.
I mean, they're in New England. Was Bill Belichick really setting up Jimmy Garoppolo to take over and had him exactly positioned where he wanted to make the transition? He still could have gotten value for Tom Brady in some kind of a trade somewhere. Maybe it cost him a Super Bowl. I don't know. But I think there was a formula in place. And I do think that for whatever reason that plan changed. That they just thought Brady had too much left in the tank.
I think it was the same thing, right? It's like they planned for the future the way you should do, and then Brady did what he did, which is, I'm not dealing with that timetable. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep being amazing. So you're going to have to change your timetable or we part ways now.
I mean, it had to be brutal. No matter, just from a human standpoint, to watch Tom Brady win that Super Bowl in Tampa.
Right.
Because they were middle of the road team. I'll never forget in the middle of last season, I watched them play a couple of games and getting ready for one of the broadcasts. And I go, I think Tampa's the best team. And I had a top 5 list that George had me put together. And I go, I'm putting Tampa at whatever they were, 7-5, as the number 1 team. And so of course, you know how it is on Twitter. I'm getting slaughtered. Just slaughtered. And I go, I know, but I've seen all these teams. And I think they have the best team. So then they go out and they just literally, I think the next game was the game that we did in Tampa where New Orleans beat them like 38-3. And I go, George, I am never putting together another top 5 list, you jackass, make me do that and look like an idiot. But it was there. It was there the whole time. They just had not, and they just put it together at the right time, as we've seen before.
How much of a dumpster fire are your mentions on Twitter? Because mine are bad, and you have a lot more followers than I do.
You try not to be canceled from life because of something that you personally have written. You want to push the envelope. You want to say something that you really believe, but it doesn't matter. It is.
All 32 NFL teams think that you personally hate their team.
Oh,
right?
for sure. Especially Cincinnati.
Right.
Cincinnati's the worst because the assumption is that
You're overcompensating.
That I should be defending them at all costs. And I'm sure people have probably figured me out after as long as I've been on the air. But basically the fourth quarter, if the game's over, I do a little victory lap for the winning team. So if Pittsburgh is kicking Cincinnati around the field, I'm not going to talk about how crummy Cincinnati is, but I'm going to sing the praises of Pittsburgh for the fourth quarter. I think that's fair. I always have a million stories and a million different guys I want to talk to, but a game breaks out every once in a while. You got to talk about the game. But when you get an opportunity to talk about the guys and their stories and why they've been successful, so if it's a big blowout, you may get the whole second half of that. Because the alternative is ripping the hell out of the other team. And it was so funny. Like when I first started doing the games, I did the lowest of the low games. I mean, I was the 7th or 8th broadcast team. So I would be doing, like, back in the days, it was like Cleveland against Indy. It would be like 2-10 versus 1-11 kind of games. And so you go in for these production meetings, and what are you going to ask? Why do you guys suck? Like, what are the other questions? Like, what's gone wrong here? What happened? And so the meetings were always awful. I mean, it was like they hated me, and they were just, so then you're on the air and you're breaking down why these teams are so terrible. Thank God I finally got to Sunday Night Football and Al Michaels, and now the question is, hey, tell me why you're so good. And what a difference my life is. It's like so nice. This is a huge difference. And I almost feel sorry for the Tony Romos of the world that they didn't have to experience
the bad.
Oh, because you cannot appreciate what it's like to sit in our chair today and call those games unless you've been in those meetings, There were a couple of times in Cleveland, I was like, I am not going to get out of Cleveland alive with Belichick and Nick Saban. And I mean, these guys, because they knew how to coach.
Right.
And it was just, it hadn't come together. Then it finally did eventually. So.
And they're still grinding through those bad teams, having to answer questions about why they're so terrible.
Oh.
God, that's got to be rough. All right, we got some mailbag questions in. One I like that I want to ask from a guy called Nathan Pardalo. I think that's how we pronounce that. Imagine the NFL restarts now and you're essentially drafting from scratch, but quarterbacks are already off the table. Quarterbacks have been taken care of. They've been assigned however it's done. Who's the next player you start with? Like, what position is it? Who do you go for? Essentially, when you're team building, what's the next most important spot?
I know the PFF answer is wide receiver, cornerback.
Right.
And I think that's fair. I do think it's probably, the right answer. My problem with cornerback is, if you're going to become a man coverage team, you got to have at least 4 of them.
Yeah.
Like the New Englands of the world. All right, they're committed. They're going to have great back end. They're going to play man coverage. They're going to get after you. And that's a good. But does one do that for you? I would think one great wide receiver at the very least is going to force double teams.
Right.
So for me, when I watch film, people say, well, how do you know who the better player is? I'm like, I typically don't, but the other coaches on the other team do, and whoever is getting double teamed or whoever is in the secondary that is in man coverage all day, pardon me, against their best receiver, it's about, can this guy play singled up, or on offense, can he draw a double team? Aaron Donald, right?
Yeah.
There's 2 guys. It's not hard to see. You watch the film, there's 2 guys on him all the time. Like, okay, that's the best player, right? So it's not.
I mean, even if Aaron Donald wasn't wrecking it every play, you would have a pretty good indication that guy is something
right.
different.
Even if he does nothing the whole game, I know he's taken 2 blockers. So that was the one that they were most concerned about. So I wouldn't go outside the formula. I think it is cornerback, wide, but I have to say that I love interior pressure.
Yeah.
I just do. I've talked to enough quarterbacks that they hate it literally hate it when there's really good interior pressure. And we saw a Tom Brady Super Bowl change. Yeah. The Giants won with interior pressure against them that day.
And I think it is more complicated than just you go cornerback, wide receiver, because as you said, it's how many guys you need and how much impact can one guy make. And it's always more nuanced than just like this is the order you take it off in, because you might have Darrell Reed. Remember when the Raiders had Nnamdi Asomugha for years, right? And that guy got like 15 targets a year because on the other side, it was garbage. And Nnamdi Asomugha would stay on the right side of the defense all game long in man coverage, locking down his guy. Nobody would ever throw the ball his direction because they were targeting the other side 15 times a game, racking up 200 passing yards on that side. It's like, well, why would you ever test this guy? Unless you have a Darrelle Revis where you're going to move him and you're going to follow the number one wide receiver. And even then, if number 2 and number 3 are bad, it's not doing that much for you. Whereas elite pass rusher or elite wide receiver, like those one individual guys can make a monster impact even if everyone else around them is garbage. So it is more complicated than just that. But what since you've owned PFF, what are some things that you sort of learned from the PFF way of doing things that changed the way you thought about the game?
Running backs for sure. I mean, we all grew up in an era when it was O.J. Simpson and Franco Harris, and the running backs were the stars. Yeah. They were the stars. But when you really start to understand what difference it makes when Dallas had a healthy offensive line that was that dominant, did it really matter that Ezekiel Elliott was running the ball?
Right.
And I think that's the hardest thing to evaluate with these college running backs is how do you evaluate Najee Harris and Travis Etienne when in general, most of their career, they've been 5 yards downfield before they're getting touched.
Yeah.
So it's always a full circle. I can remember Philadelphia when they won the Super Bowl, and we talk about all the things that happened at the quarterback position. But in my mind, they were the dominant offensive and defensive line in football that year. And I think I even opened the broadcast with my opening on camera as I'm trying to breathe my way through it. And I said that. And I thought it sort of played its way out. Eventually the defensive line obviously didn't have a huge game, but eventually it was their sack fumble that locked it up. So I tend to be, but the hard part again is, does one guy anywhere make that kind of difference? But I do agree now that it's much more about the offensive line than what it is about the running backs.
I think that Philly defense is still the PFF record holder for the highest pressure rate over a season. Pittsburgh might have topped it this past year. I haven't checked since, but they were up at like 47% or something insane, like ridiculous volume. Like if you're pressuring the opposing quarterback almost half the dropbacks that guy has, like it's a huge advantage. And what made Philadelphia so good is that they were able to run 7 deep in terms of guys that can get pressure. So you couldn't just let's take away Fletcher Cox. Well, okay, then Brandon Graham and everybody else. It was a nightmare. So yeah, the Eagles, you're right. I think they really nailed this idea of we're just going to be dominant in both sides of the line, and then you can't pass on us because we're going to get pressure the whole time, and we're going to be able to run the ball and pass the ball against you because the offensive platform we're giving it is so good. And it makes those questions about Pittsburgh with Najee Harris this year. The first round, it's only one pick. You can only bring in one guy. And this was the Bengals with Penei Sewell versus Jamar Chase as well. It's like the decision is not do you fix the offensive line or do you get a skill position player or a running back or whatever it is, because you can only bring in one. You're not fixing the offensive line. You're bringing in one guy to move the needle on the offensive line. And how much is that worth versus a wide receiver or a running back? And I think it's a lot more than a running back, but might not be more than a wide receiver.
The other thing that we talk about a lot that I've spent more time thinking about is the contested catch. Because there was a time when I was playing, they didn't throw contested catch balls. I mean, you either got a step on the defender or you weren't getting a ball deep down. I mean, right. I'm 6'4" or 5", or I'm probably 6'3" now after shrinking. But, they didn't just throw it up and let you go try to make a play.
Because the contest with the contest from the DB was him throwing a missile at your head.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. I mean, there are two things that have changed so significantly since I played. One's the gloves.
Yes.
I mean, please let me cheat and wear those gloves one time.
Those things are insane.
Insane.
If you haven't picked up a receiver glove, like one of those C-tack cutters things, it will blow your mind how sticky those things are on a football. It's ridiculous.
Somebody told me the league got presented with a glove that you could stick out your hand, not even like grab your finger.
Just hold it flat.
And it would fly paper the thing.
Yeah.
It would just catch the ball, and they're like, okay, that's illegal. That's actually
that
going
one's a step too far.
But
those cutters things aren't far off that. Like, you don't need to do much. You could stick out your hand like that and tiny little little stick.
It doesn't take much. But probably the biggest difference since I was playing was that you can't get hit right there anymore.
Right.
That the idea of going over the middle and throwing a contested catch ball to a tight end or a wide receiver. When I played, you would not have lived for a 10-year career.
Right.
You would be dead. Like I had at one point in my career, I think I had 3 straight games. I had stitches in my chin, and my cousin who played at Eastern Kentucky said, "How stupid are you?" Because they have chin straps with padding in it now.
Yeah.
You can if you're a fullback, you understand that you got to get that. I'm like, that's a good idea right there. I never got stitches again, so that was brilliant. But I think it's made guys brave that really aren't brave. I mean, okay, I used to say you could take a sledgehammer to my back because the human body, think about it. The human body is meant to be protected from the back.
Yeah.
There's nothing in back of you that is going to really hurt other than you get hit in the head. But I mean, you have bone structure, you have soft hamstrings, calves, you have in the front, everything hurts. You get hit in the foot, you get hit in the shin, you get hit in the knee, you get hit in the thigh, you get hit in the middle, you get hit in the stomach, you get into under the chin, in the face. Everything hurts.
Yeah.
So your protection in front of you is your eyes.
Those quick hooks, quick hitches, all those kinds of things. I never worried about getting hit in the back with running those routes. It was only
fine.
ever
Like hit me, I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference.
You're right. It's the stuff from the front or the stuff that's targeting like knees and things. And I played in a league where you didn't really have to worry about getting hit in the head much. But you go back to your era, you really did. Like that. Those contested catches were not the same thing back then.
I mean, I'm not sure any of us would have finished the game with the concussion protocols that they have now. It's like, you making those plays when I staggered back to the huddle? I think when I had to leave the game, like how would you finish a football game?
We don't have enough
no
people for this. Yeah. It's incredible that like those gloves though I think are absolutely ridiculous. So like I've got pretty small hands, right? But you put on those C-tack gloves, you can catch almost everything. You look at a guy like Larry Fitzgerald with his giant mitts of hands wearing those gloves, you're like, of course that guy never drops the ball. It's like a cheat code.
But the game is so much better with it because the primary difference in professional football is the ability to throw it and catch it.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you've given a little cheat code to enhance the spectacular, I mean, and we get spectacular.
Well, like Odell Beckham, the catch.
Is spectacular, right?
You don't want that just slipping through his hands because he doesn't have sticky gloves on.
The 3-finger catch and his ability on that play to stay in bounds.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, because he was being fouled, he got knocked to the boundary. He only got one hand on it, and he only got 3 fingers on it. I mean, and he got his feet down in the end zone. Like, when I saw it live, I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure he made the catch. because I'm 150 yards away from it. I go, I'm pretty sure he made the catch. There's no way he was in bounds or didn't step out or didn't bobble the ball when he landed or something went wrong. And it's like, he did them all. He got them all.
Yeah.
And now it's like, where's he going to be? What's he going to do this year? It's bizarre to follow the league sometimes.
It is incredible. Like the storylines there's no off season, right? We're in the middle of May, when in a period that should be completely dead. We're talking about Julio Jones getting traded. We're talking about Odell Beckham, whether he's going to stay with Cleveland or whether they should move on from him. The league has mastered this 365 days a year, always storylines, no offseason, no break. just keeps on trucking.
I mean, my year is so bizarre because I really miss watching. When I was doing the studio with Fox or with NBC, I used to be able to watch all the games in the league. Now, anybody who thinks they can watch all 16 games is a fool. You can't. The most I could really have a little understanding of was maybe 3, realistically 2 going on at the same time. But at least, people are hollering out from around the room and what's going on. Hey, look at this, So you have some idea of league-wide. Today, with what I do, it's like so myopic. I mean, it's like just 2 teams, and that's my entire life for an entire week. And I see a couple of highlights, and I watch a little bit of games on Sunday before we go to the stadium. But it's not like I really can follow the league like I used to. So then we come out of that, and now I start watching a little NFL film, getting ready for free agency, and then I watch the college football season basically with the draft, and I'm studying that. But now, it's like starting all over again. So I have my boards and I have my research, and I'm just going team by team through these things, and I'm getting up to speed on stuff that you and Steve know frontwards and backwards because you saw it all season. The last time I saw the Jets play or the Jaguars play, or there's teams, like people ask me questions about Cincinnati. I'm like, I haven't seen Cincinnati or studied them forever. So I love our schedule this year. We've got 21 different teams. And I think it's sort of a tribute to, all the new exciting places for quarterbacks. You've kind of got Matthew Stafford now over there. You got Jared Goff back here in Detroit. You got Tom Brady down there. We don't know what Aaron Rodgers is going to happen. Justin Fields, Trey Lance, Zach Wilson. I mean, this is exciting, right?
Yeah.
We've got a lot of possibilities in a lot of different things. We were talking about it the other day. It's like, who is it that doesn't have hope right now? Okay, Houston, that's probably top of the list. But other than that, is there somebody that you just go, there's no way? Cincinnati? Is there no way Cincinnati could?
There's not many teams that have nothing on paper.
I agree. And the quarterback dispersal has gotten what's made the difference. I mean, and we've been lucky. We've kind of hit like a 1983-ish kind of hot zone for young quarterback play. But I think that's been enhanced by the money. I think the money aspect of that teams now want to take advantage of that 5-year window if they're drafted in the first round, to where they can go spend on the rest of their salary and not have to do, like the Rams had to do. I mean, they had to get rid of Goff. They had to do a salary dump and whatever it took. But they have Stafford and they have really high-end players. But when you look at the Rams and the quality of the people that they had to let go, not the top-end guys, but a lot of the depth. And as we go into 17 games now, depth is going to be a major factor.
And teams are also more willing to move on from a quarterback that isn't that top 5 guy, because everyone wants to chase the top 5 guy on the rookie contract. So if you have a Jared Goff or a Carson Wentz and things have started to unspool a little bit, you're going to move on from those guys in a way that 10 years ago you might have just been stuck with them because, okay, it hasn't worked out the way we wanted it to, but it's still better than being stuck with, whoever the next quarterback bust is that we're not going to have a shot at in the draft. So I think it's the availability of quarterbacks and the value of those rookie guys it's changed the NFL.
And they're going to get on the field sooner than they ever did. It's just such an interesting game. It's amazing that the NFL can hold your attention for the whole season. I mean, there's NBA playoffs going on. There's NHL playoffs going on. Baseball season, back-to-back nights of no-hitters in baseball. I mean, really exciting stuff. And we're going, oh man, I wonder what the Patriots are going to do with it. And it's not just us because we're in it. It's like I can't go. I've been at events and sat at tables with politicians and actors and all these big people, and inevitably the conversation always starts with football. It just always does. Like, oh man, I'm like a Saints fan. What did you think of their draft? What did you? And it's just sort of the common bond of this country.
I mean, there's a reason you guys are the #1 show every single week. People love football. Chris, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for doing this.
It's been fun.
I'm going to let you pack up and get out of here. I'm going to answer some questions while we're doing that. We're live, so I got to keep on trucking and just
keep on trucking, man.
Let you
Absolutely.
bounce. But this has been awesome. The Cris Collinsworth podcast featuring Richard Sherman. Send our millions of listeners over there.
We need some of your millions over there.
Get
And
you guys
our
cooking.
podcasts are getting pretty good, though. Not ours, but George and Eric had them on the other day, and with the what's it called, the forecast.
Yeah, we got a lot of cool stuff.
forecast.
The 2 for 1 has taken off over the draft. Those guys have been absolutely.
Those guys
cooking.
have some good drunk stories now.
I'm sure they do. Yeah, like the volume of stimulants in their system at all times. We got a box of smelling salts over there that
I
they
heard
crack
that.
before every show.
Yeah.
Austin during the draft, just chain drinking Red Bulls, and in addition to the smelling salts, and we had him on Monday. But yeah, their podcast's taken off. Ours is doing well. Yours is heading in the right direction with Richard Sherman. It's all good.
Do you think if I did the smelling salts, I'd talk as fast as Austin Gale does?
No, it's not possible.
It's not possible.
No.
It's like I couldn't even. My wife can do that. My wife can do
There's
that. She's
people that like
fast.
listen to podcasts at like 1.5 speed, just to get through them quickly. If you were listening to Austin Gale at 1.5 speed, I mean, at some point it just becomes like a white noise, right? It's not words anymore.
It's
just
like R2D2 at that point.
That guy talks unbelievably quickly. It's insane.
It was fun, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, anytime. Thanks for
All right,
doing
next
it.
time I want my picture up here. Though,
We'll get you. We'll get you. Yeah,
I'll
well,
wear
I
a
have to-
hat again, so
I
you'll
couldn't have
a
mine
snapshot.
on because you don't have one. So we'll have to make you a little silhouette, the Chris silhouette. But we could animate it and have it like slide in. Just constant.
Second thought, my profile is not real strong. Let's just skip
I'm
it.
not sure mine is much better.
It's fun, man.
Thank you, sir. Take it easy. All right, I'm going to launch straight into a question from somebody called Alan Romack Jr., which is a pretty good name. He's got a question about the Washington football team and how they're building the team, and in particular, what they're doing with quarterback. His email is, the roster right now I think is pretty good, but it's vitally missing a franchise quarterback. He's not terribly optimistic about Fitzmagic. Doesn't think Washington's going to be bad enough to get a top 10 pick next year. So how does Washington have a path through to a franchise quarterback? He wants Spencer Rattler from Oklahoma, even though he's heard there's some character concerns. But Washington's almost certainly not going to have the opportunity. The main question is, with Washington not trading up for a quarterback, did they use the right process just by continuing to build up a team with a good team without a future quarterback? Honestly, I think they did. Like, I think you can look at this and say they goofed because they didn't make a big trade up for Justin Fields or Mac Jones or whoever it is in the draft, right? The first thing I think you need to think about is maybe they didn't like those two guys, right? It isn't a 5 quarterback first round for everybody. Maybe Washington just didn't like a couple of those guys. Philadelphia was another team that said, if Zach Wilson's available, we're in. If Zach Wilson's gone, and he was going to be gone at number 2, we're out on the quarterbacks. We don't like any of the remaining 3, so we're done. We're going to punt to next year, essentially, and roll through this season with Jalen Hurts. Now, Philadelphia is probably getting another first-round pick from Indy for Carson Wentz. They're probably not going to be that great this year. You can make a case that's a lot better to say Philadelphia can punt this year and they're going to be drafting in the top 5 or have the capacity to draft top 5 next year and get that quarterback. Washington is not in that situation. But they are in a situation, I think, where they looked at it and said, we're a playoff team. We were a playoff team last year. Okay, it was in the NFC East. It was a bit of a punchline, but we've gotten better. We're heading in the right direction. We want to be contending this season. And even if we don't have shot at a franchise quarterback, Ryan Fitzpatrick over the last 3 years has a top 15 PFF grade. Okay, it's 15, so it's, let's say it's league average. But he can give us league average quarterback play that will be a bit of a roller coaster. You're going to get ridiculously high-end games. You're going to get some pretty terrible games. Overall, over the season, it's going to level off to a middle-of-the-road team. And if we build a really good roster around him, that guy can contend. It's a long shot, but that's what you're dealing with when you don't have a Patrick Mahomes. So I think they looked at it and said, look, our best chance of winning in 2020 is get Ryan Fitzpatrick, surround him with talent, and let's see how that goes. And we'll bring back Taylor Heineke in case he can repeat the magic that he had in the playoffs, and then we'll just figure it out in the future. And I honestly think that's not a bad way of doing it. Not everybody is going to have an opportunity at this top 5 quarterback, and I don't think every team is in a position where your best move is to just blow it all up so that you can get that shot. And I think that's basically what you're asking for if you're asking them to do anything other than what they did. is to just say we have to torpedo this entire thing and rebuild from the ground up. And I don't think that's why. I think what Washington is doing is essentially what those Minnesota Vikings teams were doing throughout much of the 90s, which is let's just deal with quarterback as it comes up. We'll maintain a very good roster, and we'll try and get reasonable quarterback play through veterans. And whether it's Fitzpatrick, whether it's Heineke, maybe they're a team that doubles down or gives a reclamation job to Jared Goff next year if he doesn't work out with the Lions. And they'll just keep going until they get to be in a position where they do draft the next quarterback and the guy that is clearly the quarterback of the future. I think there's a way, particularly now, the stuff we were talking about with Chris, the stuff we've mentioned before with Steve, I think there's a way now where you can kind of treat the quarterback position like that. If you don't have a clear answer of an elite top 5 guy, you can juggle between guys that are okay and viable and capable and just wait until an opportunity presents itself. So I like what Washington has done. I think calling Fitzpatrick when you don't have a shot at an elite quarterback is the right thing to do. And I'm kind of hopeful. I'd like to see it work out for them. All right, this question is from somebody called Maxime Gauthier, maybe. Hello, my suggestion. For what positions is depth more valuable than top-end talent and vice versa? This, I think, is a really interesting question. Which positions, essentially, again, the stuff we were talking about with Chris, which positions does one player make a massive difference versus being extremely deep across the board? I think wide receiver is the obvious answer, where one guy makes a receiving core almost. Look at what the Green Bay Packers have had. They've been able to have a good group of receivers and a good passing game with essentially just DeVonta Adams. Now, there's a level to how high that can take you, and the Packers did need to bring on an Alan Lazard, to get Marquez Valdes-Scantling to develop, and they could use a high-end number 2, but that one guy is going to take you a long way in a way that I don't think one guy would take you if you had the cornerback. I don't think you can get by with just that one elite player. Now, the Rams have shown that you can take that one corner quite a way and at least use it to boost the production of everybody else. The Troy Hills of the world, the Darius Williams of the world. I think those guys are definitely aided by Jalen Ramsey being on board, but I don't think it does the same as DeVonta Adams does. I think offensive line is the other obvious one in terms of needing depth, not needing one superstar. Like one elite left tackle, Joe Thomas in his prime, and 4 stooges is not a good offensive line. 5 guys that are average is a better offensive line than one Hall of Famer and 4 guys that suck. So I think those are probably the most obvious ones that jump to mind. Turner Badkowski says, essentially, draft grades should be about a team's process rather than the picks. The Browns had a great process and thus deserve a good draft grade, even if every player busts. And he'd love for that to be highlighted, even if it's not really a question. I think this is an interesting topic because as soon as we spend months talking about all of these prospects and all these draft available rookies, and then the second the draft happens, everybody starts saying, we don't know anything about these guys. They've never taken a snap in the NFL. That guy could be anything. I think it's a mistake to treat players as complete unknowns heading into their first season. We don't know nothing about these guys. If we did, we wouldn't have spent the last 2 months evaluating them as prospects. The draft wouldn't be, a hierarchical order where draft picks have incredible value and the Jimmy Johnson chart, gets incredibly steep the higher up the draft you get. It would be like a random lottery, and it isn't that. So we do know something about these players. That's not to say that there still isn't the capacity for somebody to be a massive bust in the first round, just be a disaster and everybody get it wrong, or to say that a guy in the 6th round won't turn out to be the best player in the draft. It's not universal, but it isn't a complete unknown. It's not a complete lottery. So I think you can grade picks as well as process. I agree that process needs to be a big part of it, but if you're drafting a guy in the first round who nobody else thought was a first rounder, it was just a consensus like mid-round guy, nobody thought was going to be this high-end prospect, I think you can give a draft grade to that to say that that's just not a good pick. And you can definitely say that that's a process part of that as well. But I think just generally, we can treat draft players or rookies as if we know a little bit about them. It's not a complete unknown, I think. All right, here's one from somebody called Konstantinos, who's an avid fan of the podcast from Cyprus, a little island in the Mediterranean, somewhere in the direction of Greece. Currently based in London and has been following us for the last 3 years. You guys made me fall in love with the game of football with a nuanced perspective that you try and introduce to the game. My question is the following. The main criticism that you normally have for quarterbacks is the fact that they hold the ball longer. But before making such a criticism and making a judgment, we should make a judgment rather on whether that impacted a quarterback's performance. Essentially, we should consider the potential circumstances that might have caused that. He then goes into a long kind of explanation about, there are other elements out there that can impact or influence whether a quarterback holds onto the ball too long. So, if bad play calling puts him in 3rd and long situations where you're going to hold onto the ball longer than 1st and 10 where you're delivering a quick slant, I think it's a reasonable point. And I think the point that we would make is that, look, the quarterback influences time to throw more than anything else out there. It's not to say that that's the only influence. Good coverage influences time to throw. Bad pass protection influences time to throw. Play calling influences time to throw. Scheme generally influences time to throw. All these things, but nothing moves the needle more than just the style of quarterback you have. And we've seen that before when you have quarterbacks change teams, and in exactly the same offense, the time to throw is completely different. So I think it's not to say that, look, every single time a quarterback holds the ball, it's a bad play, it's a bad decision, it's bad process by that quarterback. But I think it is when we're using it on this show to say, hey, this is a thing that this quarterback does that's not necessarily a positive that potentially hurts teams. It's because it's a potential concern independent of the things we're talking about. And yes, you might be able to move the number a little bit by changing those other things, but it's indicative of something that we've seen and that we're trying to articulate as a potential problem for these teams. So, Justin Fields, I think, is the one that's come up in the last few weeks. Justin Fields' time to throw is high, but it's not that that's like the only issue we're talking about. It's that Justin Fields has this tendency to just be a tick slow with his process. Not that he can't read a defense or that he can't work through progression, but that the ball's going to be in his hands longer than it would be for most other quarterbacks in exactly the same scenario. And that is potentially an indication of this this trait that we've been talking about, that whatever the opposite of press-resistant players is, pressure-resistant players, Justin Fields is just a little bit susceptible to things going awry when that pressure arrives or when the blitz arrives or when he has to calculate on the fly against things that change his process. And some quarterbacks, I think, do that incredibly well, and Justin Fields doesn't do it as well as these other quarterbacks. Now, the point I always make is that, look, even if he did struggle with that stuff, the guy had 3 straight seasons of a 90-plus PFF grade. So how big a problem really is it? I don't know the answer to that question. Justin Fields may end up being a 90-graded quarterback in the NFL, being the next Russell Wilson, being a phenomenal player. We just don't know how much of an influence this negative trait is going to have. But I do understand that it's a negative trait that you can see on tape and that NFL teams would be scared of. NFL teams would shy away from, because it is something that can go badly wrong and can limit you to a Tyrod Taylor kind of season or a kind of ceiling. And if you have that with Justin Fields, like, it's a bad first-round pick. So I think it's just exploring that area and then sitting back and seeing how it pans out for the Chicago Bears. Like, I'm optimistic about Fields as a player, but I do understand why he slid and why some teams would be scared of him. Okay, next question. Tony Catalano says, essentially asked, is there a correlation between a player's size and injury rate, right? The DeVonta Smith thing. Guy measured 166 pounds at the medical combine, so he's too small to play at the NFL level. He'll get injured. It's a problem, right? His essential question was, is that actually a proven thing, or is it just old man yelling at clouds type of stuff? I don't remember where I read this, but I have read a report or a study that says actually it's almost the reverse. Like, the bigger players are, I think it was looking at quarterbacks more than anything else, but the bigger a quarterback is, the more likely he's going to get injured. So Cam Newton's Ben Roethlisberger's are more likely to get injured than a 6'2", 210-pound quarterback who you would say is a small player for the position. And it's probably to do with how they play. Ben Roethlisberger, because he's 255 pounds or whatever, is willing to take whatever hits you throw in his direction. Like if you think, when you imagine Ben Roethlisberger in his NFL career, it's going to be hanging in the pocket with 3 guys draped all over him, delivering a pass anyway. That is a hit that a 210-pound quarterback probably isn't taking. And if he is taking, he's taking it and going to the ground, not waiting for number 2 and number 3 to jump on the pile as well. I don't know whether it extends to other positions, receivers, corners, etc., but I think it probably is. I don't think that just size correlates to your propensity to break, like bone snapping, muscles tearing. I don't think size is the driving force behind that. All right, next question. This is from somebody on Twitter called Chansey. How many replacement level players does it take on an offense to offset a true franchise quarterback? Mahomes, Rodgers, Brady, et cetera, et cetera. So I was curious about this. This is definitely not the R&D approved answer to this question, but I was just down and dirty, rough and ready fashion. Let's go and look at the Tampa Bay Bucs last year. Tom Brady, according to PFF WAR, was worth 4.35 wins above replacement. So essentially, Tom Brady is an additional 4.5 wins to this team based off whatever random quarterback you're going in there. The rest of the offense, so 2 running backs, top 3 wide receivers, and I'm actually giving them 12 players here. Top 2 running backs, top 3 receivers, Gronk, the offensive tackles, the offensive guards, and the center were worth something like 2.5 wins above replacement. I actually worked this out and then managed to delete that number. So bear with me while I crank it out right here. But I think it was worth something like, there you go, 2.25 wins above replacement. So essentially Tom Brady is worth more than the rest of the offense put together if you swap those guys out with replacement players. Now, that's probably not as clean as that, right? Because as soon as you replace his receiving weapons and his offensive line with replacement level players, Tom Brady's WAR is going to go down. Like it's going to be influenced by the players around him. So it's not as clean as that, but it highlights the point that we've been making the whole way along. That look, I know people get frustrated sometimes with the quarterback way of approaching the league, right? God, let's talk about some other positions. But quarterback is it. Like quarterback is everything. It is the most important position. There's a reason that Patrick Mahomes gets a $500 million contract. If anything, the data says that like those guys are still underpaid with the percentage of the salary cap that they are taking up. They should be getting paid even more. They're worth even more than that than you think they are. And it kind of sums it up, right? On very abstract terms, Tom Brady is worth significantly more to that team than everybody else on offense put together. And it kind of makes sense. Like when you look at the difference between Brady and even Jameis Winston, who isn't a replacement level quarterback, it's night and day. It's bumbling along, hoping we make the playoffs one year, to we're Super Bowl champions and we're arguably the best team in the NFL. That's the power of an elite quarterback on an NFL team. It's why the Chiefs can do basically anything they want in the course of an offseason, and they're going to be favorites heading into every single season because they have Patrick Mahomes. It's why Seattle can watch that team crumble around them. The Legion of Boom, like look at that defense now. Doesn't matter. Russell Wilson's there. They're one of the favorites for the division. They're going to be contending every single year. Quarterback is basically everything. It seems like an obvious thing, but that's why we dedicate so much time to it. That's why a lot of our negativity show, a lot of the reasons for pessimism was your quarterback. It was those teams that don't have a quarterback that's capable of elevating everything around them and taking it to the next level. So that's the rough and ready answer to that one. That's it for our questions. I'm going to pull out one of the names that I just went through in terms of questions, and one of those guys will win a free PFF subscription. But that'll do it for the semi solo show. Me here on my own. Next Monday, I believe Steve is back in the office, fresh off the vacation. I don't know if he's fresh off the fro. We'll have to see whether that survived Florida or not. Chris, thank you. Huge thank you to Cris for being on the show. Go to the Cris Collinsworth podcast featuring Richard Sherman. Download, subscribe that. Download, subscribe to the 2-for-1 podcast with Austin Gale and Mike Renner, who was here Monday. Download the Forecast. Subscribe to that. Subscribe to all the PFF shows. I will be back on Monday. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me and Austin and Cris, minus Steve. The combination, Sam and Steve, the fish, will be back on Monday. Thanks for listening. Take it easy.